What unexplained secret do you have from your childhood? Story 1. I have a story that remained a mystery until a few years ago. When I was 5, I had a big bay window that faced into our backyard. One night, I was sitting in bed with the curtains open, reading, when I suddenly heard a loud thump against the window. I looked up and saw what I could only describe as a zombie pressed against the glass, staring at me with cloudy, lifeless eyes. I completely froze, not knowing what to do. I was the kind of kid who never had nightmares, wasn't afraid of the dark. I knew monsters weren't real, but there it was, slowly sliding down the window. Terrified, I bolted from the room, barely able to form words as I ran to my grandparents. When they finally calmed me down enough to talk, they took me outside to show me that nothing was there. That should have been the end of it, but when I woke up the next morning, I noticed a greasy smear on the window and what looked like small pieces of flesh beneath it. When I pointed it out, my grandparents brushed it off, saying maybe a bird had hit the glass. And that was the end of it, at least for them. For years after, I was terrified of the dark, needed nightlights everywhere, and even wet the bed a couple of times because the hallway was too dark to get to the bathroom. I also started having really bad nightmares. This remained an unsolved mystery for nearly 20 years. Then a couple of Thanksgivings ago, my family was sharing weird things that had happened to them, and I told my story. My uncle immediately burst into laughter. Once he could breathe again, he told me the truth. At the time, my uncle lived in the house next door. He had a friend who worked in special effects for movies, and she had asked him to let her refine the makeup she was working on for a floating corpse. That night, he was coming home from helping her. He still had the makeup on because he wanted his wife to see it. As he cut through our backyard as a shortcut, he noticed me in bed. Thinking it would be hilarious, he slammed against my window to scare me, then went home and forgot all about it for years. Meanwhile, I was left traumatized and mentally scarred. Story 2. When I was about 6 or 7, I lived in a different house than I do now. My mom tucked me into bed like any other night, but when I woke up, I was in a very tight space. It was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing, and I felt completely trapped. Panic set in, and I started screaming for help. What felt like 5 minutes passed, screaming, crying, before something suddenly jerked whatever I was inside. Then I heard a zipper being pulled. Light flooded in, and my dad's face appeared above me. I was inside a suitcase, a freaking suitcase under the guest room's bed, where no one was even sleeping. To this day, no one in my family knows how I ended up there or why it happened. And it wasn't just some weird dream, because my family still talks about it sometimes. Completely bizarre. Still no explanation. Story 3. When I was a kid, I had terrible sleep issues. I would constantly call my mom because I got scared, and every time she would come in, I'd always ask for a glass of water. I was about 4 or 5, and even though I was probably annoying, the worst my mom ever did was let out a big sigh. During the day, she'd tell me I needed to work on going back to sleep instead of calling for her, but that was it. One night, I woke up scared like usual and called my mom in. She came in, but something was different. She looked irritated and, unlike every other time, she didn't bring me a glass of water. Instead, she snapped at me to go back to bed and stop being such a baby. She kept fussing at me for nearly a minute before abruptly storming out. But not even a minute later, not nearly enough time for her to have gone to the kitchen, gotten water, and come back, she walked in again. This time, she was holding a glass of water, and she was wearing a completely different nightgown. She laid down next to me, gently reassuring me that everything was okay and that I should go back to sleep. I asked her why she had changed her nightgown, and she looked confused. She told me she hadn't been back since I first asked for water. I remember being a little afraid of her the next day. I still don't know what that was. Story 4. I have a vague memory of going with my mom to pick up my older brother from a play date. While the parents talked, I played in the backyard with the friend's little sister. I was very young, preschool age, I'd guess. As the years passed, the memory faded so much that I started to think it was just a dream. Then one day, when I was around 2nd grade, I was on the bus to camp, and she was on the bus. We locked eyes at the same time, and simultaneously, we both said something like, "You're the girl from the dream." Her name was Whaley. I never saw her again after that single day at camp, even though the bus took the same route and picked up the same kids every day. Now, so much time has passed that I even start questioning whether the second encounter was real or just another dream. So Whaley, if you're out there, I remember you. Story 5. Years ago, I had a vague memory of being in a country with an Arabic feel inside someone's house while my mother tried on a sari. But for some reason, the memory was wrapped in fear. Decades later, not long before he passed, I asked my father about it, and he had an answer. It turns out we had traveled to Tunisia. This must have been around 1968, and somehow ended up with an invitation to dinner at a wealthy person's home. My mother was incredibly outgoing and had a knack for striking up conversations with all kinds of people. So did my father, now that I think about it. The scene played out just as I remembered it. But what neither my father nor I had known at the time was that the host had been running his foot up and down my mother's leg under the table for the entire meal. My mother, who often described herself as stupid, but was anything but, growing up as a woman in 1940s Australia wasn't easy, never reacted. She knew that my father had a temper, and if he had realized what was happening, things could have ended very badly. As my father put it, this was Tunisia in the 60s. If a few tourists had vanished or turned up dead in an alley, there would have been no consequences. She handled it like a pro. My mother was a force to be reckoned with. They've both been gone for 20 years now, and I still miss them almost every day. Story 6. This isn't my story, but my boyfriend's. And I've never seen him get as emotional about anything else from his past as he does about this. When he was about 4 or 5, he woke up in his room, but something was wrong. He had no idea who he was. Nothing around him was familiar. He sat there for a while, struggling to recognize something, anything. But his mind was a blank slate. Eventually, he left his room and walked down the hallway, where he found a woman. She looked at him with love and warmth. He asked, "Are you my mom?" She laughed and said, "Of course I am," assuming he was just being silly. Still confused, he looked out the window and saw a man standing near the mailbox. He ran outside and asked, "Are you my dad?" The man chuckled. "Of course I am, son." Then my boyfriend asked, "What's my name?" His dad told him. But even after hearing it, nothing clicked. No memories came back. As far as he's concerned, that was the first day of his life. He spent the rest of the day scared and sad, but eventually adjusted. Still, he vividly remembers the moment he woke up to nothingness, the fear, the confusion, and the lingering thought that something terrible must have happened right before, that his mind repressed something too awful to remember. Story 7. My father passed away when I was 3 years old. I vividly remember walking into the room where he lay, seeing his face, purple, lifeless. A dribble of chicken soup, which my mother had tried to feed him, was still running down the left side of his mouth. I remember not crying, just standing there, confused. Then I turned around, walked back to my room, and watched Power Rangers. But here's the thing. My mother adamantly insists that never happened. She says that as soon as my father started passing, she had a neighbor take me to their house. That I wasn't even in the home when he died. That by the time I came back, his room had been shut and locked for hours. My mother doesn't lie. My siblings all back up her story. They swear I never saw my father like that. And yet I remember. Nobody ever described his face to me. No one ever told me that he had aspirated chicken soup as he died. So how do I have a memory of something I supposedly never saw? I have no idea. But that's the whole point of stories like these, isn't it? Story 8. When I was around 12, my dad walked into my room holding a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. He sat down on my bed, flipping through the pages, and asked my opinion on a few of the models. I wasn't into it, because obviously this was weird. Sensing my discomfort, he left the magazine on my bed and said I could look at it whenever I wanted. I didn't touch it. Part of me was afraid it was some kind of trap or test. A few hours later, my mom found it. She walked in, holding the magazine, and asked, "Where did you get this?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Dad left it there." Her expression darkened. "Why did he do that?" Again, I shrugged. "I don't know." Without another word, she stormed off to find my dad. What followed was an hour-long argument that I could hear through the walls. The only part I remember clearly was my mom demanding, "Why does he need a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue?" And my dad responding, "I just don't want him getting weird ideas about stuff." It wasn't until years later that I realized what had really been going on. My dad had apparently suspected I was gay, and this was his clumsy way of trying to test that theory. These days, he's completely accepting of gay people, and I'm pretty sure he would have loved me no matter what. But at the time, I think he was a little uneasy about the possibility. Joke's on them, though. I'm straight, and I snuck into their room all the time to find that magazine. Story 9. In 7th grade, we had to do research projects on a U.S. president of our choice. I picked John Tyler. On presentation day, the teacher was calling students at random. As more and more people went up, I started getting anxious, knowing my turn was coming. Finally, the last student finished, and I knew I was next. But instead of calling my name, the teacher stood up and said, "Great job, everyone. See? That wasn't so bad." I stood up. "Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, you forgot me." He gave me a puzzled look. "No, I didn't. You already presented on John Tyler." I looked around the room expecting someone to back me up, but my classmates just nodded along. They insisted I had already gone. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But everyone else was so convinced that I eventually just sat down, completely baffled. To this day, that memory makes no sense to me. Story 10. When I was about 6, I hurt my cheek and was icing it with one of those frozen gel packs. For some reason, I started chewing on it. The plastic broke. A bit of the liquid leaked into my mouth. I glanced at the packaging and saw a giant warning: "Do not eat." Instantly, I was convinced I was going to die. But instead of freaking out, crying, or telling my parents, I calmly went upstairs and started cleaning my room. I combed my hair. I put on my nicest pajamas. Then I went to my mom, dad, and sister, told them I loved them, and gave them a hug. After that, I went to my room, lay down on my bed, crossed my arms over my chest like in the movies, and waited to die. When I woke up the next morning, I was incredibly relieved. To this day, I have no idea why I didn't just tell my parents what had happened, but I still remember how completely calm I felt about my impending doom. Story 11. I was about 3 or 4 years old when this happened. My mom and I were at a coworker's house for a get-together. Their daughter and I were friends, so we decided to play hide and seek. But instead of telling our parents, we just disappeared. We climbed into one of the unlocked cars in the driveway and hid. After a while, we got bored and started exploring the car. My friend found what she thought was nail polish, white out, and we started painting our nails with it. About 10 minutes later, our moms found us. They had tears running down their faces. I didn't understand why they were so upset. They wouldn't tell us. Years later, my mom finally explained. There was a compartment in that car, the only one we hadn't gone through. Inside was a loaded gun. The car belonged to a close family friend, someone who later became like a grandfather to me. He was so shaken by what had happened that he never cleaned the whiteout mess off his dashboard. He kept it there for years, a reminder to always lock up his gun. I still vividly remember the terror on my mother's face that day. Even though I was too young to understand why, I knew something was very, very wrong. Story 12. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, there was a creek in the forest behind my house where I used to play all the time. One side of the creek had a 5-foot-high dirt wall, and I would jump back and forth across the water, pretending I knew parkour. One day I went out to the creek and saw a football lying in the middle of the water. The depth of the creek made it so that the top half of the football stuck out above the surface. And strangely, the dry part of the ball was completely dry. It wasn't like the ball had rolled into the creek. It had been placed there. And that wasn't even the weirdest part. Written on the football in black, permanent marker, was my first name followed by the word jumps. And underneath it, a phone number. If my name were Johnny, it would have said Johnny Jumps, with a phone number below. I picked up the football and went home, confused and a little scared. Whoever put that ball there had been watching me. They knew where I jumped and placed it exactly where I would land. I grabbed the cordless phone and called the number. What I heard made my stomach drop. It was Homeland Security, the number you call when you think a terrorist attack is about to happen. This was only a few years after September 11th, so I knew it was serious. The woman on the other end told me it was okay and that I shouldn't call the number again. I ran to tell my mom, who was just as baffled as I was. Later that evening, my dad came by. My parents were divorced. And when I told him, he asked for the football. He said he was going to look into it. I gave it to him, and he left a few minutes later. Over the next few days, I kept asking him if he had figured anything out, but he gave me vague answers or dodged the question. Days turned into weeks, then months, and eventually, he started acting like he had no idea what I was talking about. That was about 10 years ago, and if I ask him about it now, he claims to have zero memory of it ever happening. He doesn't remember the football at all. My mom remembers it, but only vaguely. To this day, I have absolutely no idea who was watching me, why they placed that football in the creek, why it had my name on it, and, most disturbingly, why it had Homeland Security's phone number on it. I never thought much about it until I got older and realized how incredibly creepy the whole situation was. I lived near that creek for a few more years and kept playing there, but nothing like that ever happened again. All of my neighbors were friendly, and the area was a quiet, upper-middle-class suburb. Nothing else strange ever happened in the 12 years I lived there. Story 13. This happened when I was around 8 or 9 years old. One night, I was suddenly woken up at around 3 in the morning. As I shifted in bed trying to get comfortable again, something caught my eye. My bedroom door was slightly cracked open, and the light coming from the hallway looked wrong. The fixture around the bulb always gave off a warm, yellowish tint, but that night the light was pure white. Half asleep but curious, I sat up to get a better look. The second I moved, I heard a voice say, "Don't move!" Fully awake now, I froze, my mind racing. Had I actually heard that? A million thoughts ran through my head. I decided to test it. I shifted slightly. "Don't move." The voice was firmer this time. Panic started creeping in. I went through a mental checklist of who could be in the house. My dad was the only other male, but the voice didn't sound like him. It wasn't just the tone. It couldn't be him. My dad had a thick accent. I sat there completely still, in the most uncomfortable position possible, for what felt like an hour. My entire body ached, but I was too scared to move. I finally convinced myself to try one last time. This time, I would be hyper-aware, listening carefully to figure out who it was and where the voice was coming from. I slowly started to lie back down. The second my head hit the pillow, the voice practically screamed, "Don't move!" I lost control. I peed myself. At that moment, I knew it wasn't my dad. I had made something angry. I was terrified beyond words. I didn't dare move for the rest of the night. Every sense was on high alert until exhaustion finally took over, and I fell asleep. I woke up hours later, still damp, still frozen in the same position. The morning sun was shining through my window. I bolted out of bed and ran to tell my parents. For the next 2 weeks, I refused to sleep in my room. My parents, being religious, got the church involved. Story 14, 7th grade. My family was moving to a new town, and we were in the process of packing up our old house. There was a mudroom on the lower level, a small area where we kept boots, coats, and firewood. Right next to it was a room we often rented out to young working travelers, usually in their late 20s. As I was cleaning out the mudroom, I found something strange behind the firewood box. It was a small, flesh-colored bundle. It had black, beady eyes. I thought it was some kind of weird animal that had snuck in, maybe a hairless rodent or something. So I just tossed it into the garbage with the rest of the scrap wood and junk, thinking nothing of it. Months later in school, we had a S.Ed class, and that's when it hit me. I had seen a fetus. I don't know if it was human. I don't know where it came from, but I know what I saw. I occasionally wonder what actually happened and what the hell I found that day. Story 15. This happened in 1990. I was 5 years old playing at my dad's house with my brothers. I'm confident we were playing Super Mario Brothers. Suddenly I stopped, looked at my brothers and my dad and said, "There was just a car accident." My dad looked at me confused and said, "No, were you just imagining things?" I insisted. I knew something had happened. I was so persistent that my dad must have decided to humor me, just to prove me wrong. The four of us left the house and stepped out onto the street. There was nothing. No accident in front of the house. My dad gestured around and said, "See?" No accident. But I shook my head. "It's over there." I pointed down the road and started walking. My dad, probably still thinking this was a game, followed. We walked a block away, turned the corner, and there it was, a massive wreck. A young guy had been flying down the road and slammed into another car pulling out of a driveway. Both vehicles were completely mangled. To this day, the four of us still talk about it. We still can't figure out how I knew. There were no windows facing the street. It was a basement suite. We couldn't even hear people walking outside, let alone the sound of a crash a block away. Story 16. When I was around 5 or 6, my mom and I built a fairy house together. We hot-glued sticks into a little hut, almost like a dollhouse cut in half, so you could see inside. We made it as detailed as possible, glued moss to the floor for a carpet, crafted a tiny chair from a pine cone, even made a table out of small twigs. Once it was finished, we placed it in the woods near my house. inside a fairy circle, a ring of mushrooms. My mom told me that because I had built the house for the fairies, using materials from the forest and expecting nothing in return, they might leave me gifts. And they did. Over time, I found little treasures inside, sea glass, a golden seashell, which I later realized had been painted, and other tiny trinkets. Of course, I now know that my mom was the one leaving the gifts. She was smart about it, spacing them out so I wouldn't get bored. Eventually, nature took its toll, and the fairy house slowly fell apart. But the last time I visited it, something happened. I saw something tiny shoot up into the sky. It left behind a trail of sparks and glittering dust, exactly like Tinkerbell's pixie dust in movies. Inside the fairy house, I found a crystal. Excited, I ran inside to show my mom and tell her about what I saw. She smiled but then hesitated. She told me later that she had never seen that crystal before and had no idea how it got there. I still don't know if I imagined what I saw or if I actually saw a fairy. Story 17. I have a strange gap in my memory. One day while driving past our town's police station, I casually mentioned that it used to be an evangelical Christian church. My mom turned to me and said, "Oh, you used to go there with your friend X. Don't you remember?" I didn't. Apparently, when I was in 4th and 5th grade, I used to attend their youth group with my friend. That means I was old enough to remember it. I have plenty of memories from when I was 5 years old and younger. So why this blank space? The whole thing unsettled me. I was a shy kid. Social events like that should have stood out in my memory. But I remember nothing. Thinking back, my friend's family was always a little off. His mom made us sing Christian songs in the car, and there was this weird, heavy atmosphere in their house. Like something unspoken was always hanging in the air. Now I can't help but wonder, what happened there? Did something happen that made me block it all out? Story 18. We were living in a really old house in Springfield, Illinois. I was about 10 years old at the time. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away in one of the downstairs rooms. That room later became my stepfather's office and computer room. Against one wall right next to the door, we had a massive bookshelf filled with medical books and journals. It easily weighed over 1,000 pounds, probably more. One day while I was on the computer, I got up and left the room to go to the bathroom. I had only taken a few steps when suddenly the door slammed shut behind me, followed by violent shaking from inside the room. I froze. My heart pounded as I ran to find my mom. She rushed over, trying to open the door, convinced someone must be in there. But the door wouldn't budge. Panicked, we ran outside and around to the window of that room. Peering in, we saw that the room was empty. The window was still locked from the inside, and the fresh paint on the edges was unbroken. But the bookshelf, that massive bookshelf, had moved 6 feet across the room, completely blocking the door. Not a single book had fallen. It had only been a few moments. There was no way anyone, let alone several people, could have moved it that fast. My mom was convinced it was the old woman's ghost. I don't know what to believe, but I can't explain it. That house had other strange occurrences too. One time, thick smoke, like the kind from those swinging incense burners in church, started pouring out of the basement. But when we ran downstairs, there was nothing there. No source for the smoke, no fire, no lingering smell. It was like it had never happened. Story 19. When I was younger, I had an odd experience. For some reason, I would hear voices only when I drank apple juice. It happened consistently when I was a kid, but eventually it faded as I got older. The voices always sounded distant, like snippets of a conversation from far away. My young mind rationalized it as sound waves from around the world somehow reaching my ears. I even remember asking my mom if that was possible. One time, while on vacation at a family member's house, I was playing with some old toys they kept upstairs. There was one toy in particular that freaked me out. It had a strange face, and every time I looked at it, its expression seemed different. At one point, I remember it moving, right in front of me. It didn't walk or shift, but its features warped, like those weird morphing effects in movies. That night, I had a vivid dream of a room that didn't exist, located at the top of the stairs. I stood at the edge looking down and saw that same toy walking up toward me. For some reason, none of this scared me at the time. It wasn't until I got older that I realized just how unnerving it was. I hadn't even seen horror movies like Chucky yet, so it's not like my mind was influenced by that. And then there was another weird thing. When I was about 6 or 7, I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating Every single light in my room was on. I had no idea why. No memory of getting up, no clue who turned them on. I just got up, turned them off, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked my parents if they had done it. They shrugged and said I probably sleepwalked. The thing is, I never had before, and I never have since. Story 20. This happened on a military base in a PX shopping center when I was about 5 or 6. My mom had taken me shopping, and at one point she told me to sit on a bench facing the women's clothing section. She didn't want me wandering between the racks, scaring shoppers, a habit I apparently had. She wanted me in one spot where she could keep an eye on me. So I sat. 5 minutes passed, then 10. To a bored little kid, it felt like an eternity. Then another child sat down next to me. She was a girl, maybe 9 or 11, with long, silky black hair and soft brown eyes. Her skin was deeply tanned, maybe Latina or Indian, I don't remember exactly. The moment she sat down, I heard a gurgling noise. It was close, so close, but there was no direction to it. The sound wasn't coming from behind me, beside me, or above me. It was just there. I glanced at the girl, hoping for some kind of reaction. Maybe a, "Did you hear that too?" moment. But she wasn't looking around. She was staring directly at me, not in a flirty or friendly way. It was intense, like she was watching the most interesting thing in the world, and then the sound turned into words. A deep, rasping voice, like someone using a smoker's talk box, said, "Hey, little boy, how are you?" Her head tilted slightly, as if she was expecting me to respond. I almost did. I was about to open my mouth to ask her how she did that, because my first thought was ventriloquism, when the voice came again. "Hey, little boy, do you want to play?" Her mouth did not move. A sickening wave of fear washed over me. My whole body tensed. Something was wrong. I tried to stay calm. Maybe she had some kind of speaking device. Maybe she had a medical condition. I quickly glanced at her again. No device, no headset, no microphone, nothing. And then, "Hey, little boy, do you want to play?" The same gurgling voice, the same blank expression. That was it. I whimpered and bolted. I speed-walked straight to my mom, my heart racing. She turned and asked, "Why aren't you sitting on the bench?" For some reason, my fear immediately turned to irritation. Without even thinking, I huffed, "That girl was annoying me." Just like that, the fear was gone. It was like my brain rewired the entire experience into nothing more than an inconvenience. I still don't know what that girl did or why it scared me so much. Story 21. My parents had friends with a daughter who was about 2 years older than me. Our families went on holiday together a few times. This girl had a small piece of cloth that she claimed was given to her in the middle of the night by a ghost. She told me that the ghost looked exactly like her, but had a different hairstyle. For some reason, I didn't question this at all. I accepted it completely. One memory stands out vividly, or maybe I misremember it badly, but it feels real. I was around 4 or 5 years old, sitting in the back of my mom's car with the girl. My mom was driving, and the girl's mom sat in the passenger seat. Our dads and older brothers were in another car ahead of us. As we traveled along the motorway toward Devon, the girl turned to me and said, "Watch this." She took a hair clip and wrapped it in the cloth. When I wrapped this cloth around something, it moved somewhere else, but never very far. She unwrapped the cloth and the hair clip was gone. I was amazed. We searched all over the back seat until I finally found it, clipped to my seatbelt above my shoulder. To my little mind, this was absolute proof that the cloth had magic powers. Now, as an adult, I recognize how easy it would be to trick a 4-year-old with sleight of hand. But back then, I was in awe. Then she took my toy Matchbox car, a green Ford Escort that I still own today. She wrapped it in the cloth, and when she unwrapped it, the car was gone. We searched everywhere in the back of the car. This time, we couldn't find it. I started getting upset. The car was mine, and now it had disappeared. About an hour later, the girl's mother turned around from the front seat, holding something in her hand. "Is this yours?" It was my green Ford Escort. She said she had found it in the glove compartment. I was stunned. "But Sarah made it disappear in the back." My mom immediately shut it down. "No, it was in the glove box the whole time." I got upset and started crying. My mom and the girl's mom both insisted that there was no such thing as magic, that my toy must have been in the glove compartment from the start. But what disturbs me most is that if it was a trick, my mom and her friend had to have been in on it. And even when I got hysterical, they never dropped the act. That's what makes me question what really happened that day. Story 22. This is one I had forgotten about until now. My parents used to host card nights on weekends, and they would stay up late, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. One night, my mom asked me to take the dog outside before bed. It was a quiet, rural area. Hardly any cars passed by at that hour. As I stood outside waiting for my dog, I noticed him growling. He never growled. Not once before that night, and not once since. I looked up and saw a small silhouette under the streetlight across the road. It was strange, but I didn't feel scared at first. Then the figure started walking toward us. My dog became more and more uneasy, his growl deepening into a snarl. As the person reached my yard, I could finally see them clearly. It was a little old lady, even weirder. She walked right up to me. By this point, my dog was going crazy, barking and growling like I had never seen before. He loved people, so this reaction was completely out of character. Then she spoke. "Excuse me, is this my last name residence?" For some reason, I answered, "Yes." She simply nodded, thanked me, and turned around. She walked away, straight into the darkness. I never saw her again. My parents never heard anything about an old woman looking for our house, and to this day, I have no idea who she was or why she was there. Story 23. When I was in 5th grade, my teacher asked me to take a slip of paper to the teacher's lounge and give it to someone there. I assumed it was something school-related and didn't think much of it, until curiosity got the better of me. Halfway there, I unfolded the paper. It had only one sentence written on it. "Keep him there for 15 minutes. A weird, sick feeling settled in my stomach. I didn't understand, but I knew something was off. When I reached the teacher's lounge, I handed the note to the staff member inside. She read it, gave me a quick glance, and then started fumbling around, pretending to look for something. She dragged it out for exactly 15 minutes. Eventually, she handed me a random stack of papers and told me to take them back to my teacher. When I returned to class, everyone was staring at me. I could feel it. Something had happened while I was gone, but no one said a word. After class, I asked a friend what was going on. He avoided the question, gave me some vague answer, and changed the subject. Nothing ever came of it. The next day was normal. The next week was normal. My teacher never treated me any differently. I still don't know what that was about. I've thought about it over the years. Maybe it was some sort of lesson. Maybe I was being disciplined for something. But I wasn't a troublemaker. I wasn't a bully. I was a smart kid, one of the well-behaved ones. If something had happened that involved me, wouldn't I have noticed some kind of change afterward? To this day, I have no explanation for what went down in that classroom while I was gone. Story 24. When I was 4 years old, lying in bed, my closet light suddenly turned on. At the time, the closet door was at the foot of my bed, and my bed was on the same wall. To turn the light on, you would have to flip the switch from inside the closet. For some reason, I wasn't scared. Normally, as a kid, I hated the dark, and everything made me jump. But that night, I felt calm. The closet door opened, and out stepped a beautiful lady. She had freckles and brown curly hair. She was wearing white. As she stepped out, she was suddenly by my side. Still, I wasn't freaking out. She told me she was an angel. I asked why she was there, and she replied that she had been sent to watch over me. I laid out a Michael Jordan sleeping bag and a dinosaur pillow for her. She thanked me for being so hospitable. She told me to go to sleep, and I did. The next morning when I woke up, the sleeping bag was folded neatly, with the pillow placed on top. I asked my parents about it, but they both said no one had come into my room. My dad had been up late in the living room watching TV, and my mom had spent most of the night on the phone, talking to an old friend overseas. I still don't understand why she appeared or how I can remember every detail of that night so vividly. But it remains an unexplained memory that has stayed with me ever since. Story 25. I might be a little late sharing this, but I'll try. As a poor child, I was fascinated by silly, shiny objects. Things like fake gems, gold chocolate coins, and cool Pokemon cards. One year during the school book fair, I saw this really exciting purple gem-shaped eraser that fit on the top of a pencil. I wanted it so badly, but for some reason, the thing cost $3. I knew it was irresponsible to spend my food money on it, so I didn't buy it. Fast forward a little bit. While walking back to class with the group, I saw the exact same eraser just lying on the hallway floor. Without thinking, I grabbed it and stuffed it into my pocket. Now here's the part of the story I still don't understand to this day. Later in the classroom, a girl started crying because she had lost the eraser she bought at the book fair. Everyone began searching for it, and deep down, I knew the eraser in my pocket had to be hers. I stepped outside to think about what I should do. After a long moment of debating with myself, I decided to return it. I pulled the eraser from my pocket and went back into the classroom. I gave it back to her. She thanked me, and I stepped outside feeling crushed that I no longer had the eraser I had wanted so badly. I sat outside and cried for a minute. Then when I was finally ready to go back in, I glanced through the window and saw her holding the eraser, looking absolutely overjoyed. And that's when something completely impossible happened. For no logical reason, I reached into my pocket and found the exact same eraser, same color, same shape, same stupid gem design. I stared at it, completely stunned. I peeked back into the classroom, and sure enough, she was still holding her eraser. I checked 3 times just to be sure. To this day, I have no idea how that eraser ended up in my pocket again, as if it had duplicated itself. I still don't understand it. But that experience is one of many reasons why I try to treat people with kindness and keep an open mind about the unexplained. Story 26. Growing up in a regular suburban neighborhood, there were a lot of families with kids around the same age. Somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5, a new family moved in just down the block. They had 2 daughters, one slightly older than me, the other slightly younger. I played with both of them, just like all the other kids in the neighborhood. One day, while playing outside, I needed to use the bathroom. Since we were closer to their house, they offered to let me use theirs. The younger girl said that before I could use it, she had to show me something. And then she did. She had a banana. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just continued with my day and used the bathroom. I think I told my older sister later, but she just brushed it off like it was nothing. Years later, I found myself thinking back on that moment. I don't know if she was in TERS, I didn't see anything else to confirm, or if she simply identified as female and her parents let her live that way. They only rented the house for a short time before moving away, and I never saw them again. Story 27. When I was a young child, my grandparents gave me a 3-foot-tall doll named Sally. I was absolutely terrified of her. She was the monster in every one of my nightmares. Every night before bed, I would turn her to face the corner. She had those eerie, blinking eyes that opened and closed, which made her even creepier. One night, feeling extra scared, I decided to take things a step further. I wrapped Sally up like a mummy in my baby blankets and doll clothes, stuffed her into a black garbage bag, tied it, then taped it shut. I shoved her into the farthest corner of my closet. Satisfied that I had secured her, I went to bed, feeling confident that my makeshift prison would keep her contained. But when I woke up the next morning, my blood ran cold. Not only was Sally out of the closet, she was unwrapped and sitting in my kiddie chair right next to my bed. I screamed at the top of my lungs, jumped out of bed, and ran out of my room as fast as I could. To this day, my parents swear they never touched the doll. They hadn't even noticed she was missing the night before, or that I had wrapped her up and stuffed her away. My younger brother didn't do it either. He was just as scared of Sally as I was. After that incident, my brother and I ripped Sally's limbs off, with my parents' permission, and my dad threw her out with the garbage. But I still have no idea how she got out of my closet, let alone how she ended up sitting beside my bed, completely free from her restraints. Story 28. Throwaway account, because I like to think I'm not crazy. When I was about 9 or 10, I used to sleep alone on the top bunk of a small bunk bed. One night I was trying to fall asleep, but couldn't shake this overwhelming feeling of terror. The fear came out of nowhere, but I was a kid, and I had been scared of the dark before. So there I was, lying in bed, with all my senses on high alert. My room was laid out so that at the foot of my bed and to the right was my bedroom door. That door led to a long hallway which eventually led to my brother's room. Then I started hearing it, someone slowly creeping down the hall. It was deliberate, cautious, with pauses between steps. A few creaks, then silence. It felt like whoever was out there was standing still for hours before moving again. Summoning my courage, I called out a feeble, "Dad?" The creaking stopped immediately. It sounded almost like someone shifting their weight on an old wooden floor. By this point, I was sitting upright in bed, sweating, my heart pounding. I tried again, calling out, "Dad?" But as I did, I saw something, a faint shadow moving into the doorway. Before my brain could even register what I was seeing, I threw myself under the covers, pressing against the wall. I don't know how long I stayed there, pretending to be asleep, debating whether to scream for help. Eventually, I convinced myself to take a peek. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a figure standing in my doorway, but what I noticed first was its clothing. It had a very small diamond-shaped pattern, appearing gray in the darkness. A massive wave of relief washed over me. I thought it was my dad in his pajamas. I threw off the covers, exhaling in relief, and started to say, "Dad, I just had a nightmare." But it wasn't my dad. About 4 feet away from me stood a figure, gray with large black eyes. Its head had two small protruding lumps, and it had two thin horizontal nostrils. The moment I saw my first image of the stereotypical alien, I froze. I couldn't believe someone else had seen my monster. But the thing I remember most clearly, the look on its face, it wasn't angry or menacing. It looked surprised, not startled, but almost curious. And that's where my memory ends. I remember every moment up until that exact point crystal clear. But I don't remember waking up the next morning in a panic. I don't remember running to tell my parents. And strangely enough, I had no trouble sleeping the next night, or any night after. I've experienced sleep paralysis since then, but this didn't feel like that. Maybe it was a vivid dream, maybe something else. But to this day, I still wonder, what really happened that night? Story 29. From the age of 8 to 11, I lived in a house with a dilapidated garage and a big rusted kerosene tank in the backyard. I don't know what it was about that place, but that corner of the yard had an incredibly gloomy vibe. I would see strange things there all the time. One afternoon, I was in my room when I looked out the window and saw something that still gives me chills to this day. A massive black canine forelimb was reaching out from between the padlocked swing doors of the garage, clawing furiously at the outer surface. The wood was rotting away in places, and the lock and chain had a little bit of give, just enough for this one leg to squeeze through. My first thought was that a stray dog had wandered in, and my mom had accidentally locked it inside. Worried, I ran outside, unlocked the door, and swung it open. There was nothing there. The garage had no other exits. The only windows were high up, locked shut, and based on the size of that paw, it had to have been the size of a Great Dane. There was no way anything that large could have hidden inside. I was shaken, but I tried to push it out of my mind. Another time, my mom needed something from the garage at night and asked me to help. There was no working light in there, so we were searching in near total darkness. After a few minutes, I glanced out the far window, and my blood ran cold. Silhouetted against the dim glow of the sky was a human figure, sitting cross-legged on top of the kerosene tank. It wasn't just sitting there. It was waving its arms above its head in a rigid, almost mechanical motion, like some kind of eerie signaling system. I shouted, "Mom! There's someone out there waving at us." She didn't even look. She just snapped at me to stop being silly and hurried me back inside. But I think I scared her, because she refused to stay in the garage after that. There were other strange things that happened around that house, but this post is long enough already. Story 30. When I was young, I could always tell when I was dreaming, like really well. I could take control and make myself do things. Not so much anymore. One of my ways to counter nightmares was to realize I was dreaming, run away to buy myself some time, then lie down, close my eyes, and count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Then I would sit up hard and fast, opening my eyes. That was my trick. I would wake up in real life just like that. I used to be really good at lucid dreaming. Another thing I would do if I didn't like a dream was reset by killing myself in it. If I was trapped in some little pod floating over lava, I'd just bail out into the lava and I'd wake up. But one time, it completely messed with me. My nightmare escape plan had never failed before. That night I was having a bad dream, so I decided to use my trusty 1, 2, 3 trick. I did it and it worked. I sat up in bed with my eyes open. Everything seemed normal. I decided to go downstairs to grab a drink. And then, out of nowhere, I was stabbed in the chest. I had dreamt that I woke up, but the whole thing was still a dream. Then I actually woke up. For real this time. But I was so shaken, so skeptical, that I didn't trust I was really awake. I was terrified, questioning reality itself. I had never been caught off guard like that before. Story 31. I was probably about 8 or 9 years old at the time. I remember my parents watching a movie on TV in our living room. I went downstairs and asked them what they were watching. It was a Martin Lawrence movie. They told me it was about a thief who hid some treasure in a building. But years later, the building had been turned into a police station. In order to retrieve the treasure, he had to pose as a cop. I sat down and finished the movie with them. A few months later, I saw a trailer for a movie called Blue Streak. I turned to my parents and asked, if we just saw this movie on TV, why are they releasing it again in theaters? That's when they told me they had never watched that movie on TV. They insisted it looked like a brand new release. Later on, I watched Blue Streak, and as expected, I already knew most of the scenes. I remembered watching it. I remembered the details. To this day, I don't know what happened. Did I see the future? Was it a weird glitch in reality? Did I somehow imagine the entire thing? And of all movies, why Blue Streak? Story 32. I'm not sure if anyone will even see this, but I finally found a post I can relate to. As a kid, I never really had nightmares or was scared of much. When I was about 6 or 7, I was visiting my dad. My parents were divorced, and he was driving me back to my mom's house. We stopped at Taco Bell, and I remember he had this old white car with black trim. It had one of those openings in the back seat that led to the trunk. Out of curiosity, I opened it and found some dolls. They were naked baby dolls, the kind with plastic heads and plush bodies. They had those creepy blinking eyes that opened and closed when you tilted them. My dad let me keep them, and I was so excited. That night, I left them on the stairs before going to bed. At some point, I woke up to use the bathroom. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the nightlights in the hallway. That's when I saw them. I had left the dolls on the stairs right where I'd put them. But as I picked one up, I swear to this day, it moved. Its head started turning. Its eyes fluttered open and closed on their own. This was not a dream. I remember it happening vividly. I screamed, threw the doll, and ran faster than I ever had in my life. To this day, I have no idea what happened to those dolls. No one in my family even remembers them. Not my mom, not my dad. It's like they never existed. Maybe that's why I still feel uneasy in the dark. Even now. Story 33. I grew up in Hawaii in the late 70s and lived there through the mid-90s. After graduating, I moved to the Midwest for college. My family wasn't wealthy, and since I had extended relatives nearby, I couldn't go home as often as I wanted. I wasn't miserable, but I was incredibly homesick. At some point, I started scheduling my classes around TV reruns of Magnum PI just to see glimpses of home. Hawaii Five-0 had never really been my favorite. It felt like a different version of the Hawaii I grew up in. And honestly, I thought the show kind of sucked. But eventually my homesickness got so bad that I started watching that too. One day during my sophomore year, I was sitting on my couch watching Hawaii Five-0. It was an episode about corrupt, drug-dealing real estate agents or something. I wasn't really paying close attention until the criminals walked out of a house and I suddenly realized they were walking out of my house. Not a house that looked like mine, not a similar neighborhood. It was my actual childhood home. The drug dealers got into a shootout on the front lawn. One of them ended up flipping a Ford Mustang in the backyard, right next to where my bedroom window had been. I completely lost it. I called my mom and my brother. I told friends and family. It became one of my favorite stories to tell. But honestly, I don't think anyone really believed me. I could tell they thought it was just a cute story. After years went by, I started doubting myself too. I had always been homesick. Maybe my brain exaggerated the memory. Maybe I was just that desperate for a connection to home. The problem was, this all happened in the early days of the internet. There was no real way to systematically watch Hawaii Five-0 episodes back then. But then about a year ago, Netflix put the whole series online. I made a decision. I would watch every episode until I found that scene and prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I narrowed it down to the most likely 3 seasons. I didn't find it in the first season or the second. By the time I reached the third, I had almost given up. I had convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing, and then I found it. It was real. Every detail was exactly as I remembered. The episode was called The Bonsai Pipeline, Season 6, Episode 16. I told my family to watch it. Now that we all have Netflix, they finally got to see it for themselves. I can't even describe the relief I felt. After years of questioning my own memory, I finally had proof. I wasn't crazy, and let me tell you, it was cathartic as hell. Story 34. I was about 14 or 15, staying in the upstairs room I shared with my sister in our parents' home. A lot of strange things happened in that house. If this doesn't get buried, enjoy reliving my freaky youth with me. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this out. Sometimes we'd hear the floor creaking under the weight of footsteps upstairs, even when all five family members were downstairs. We all heard it. Random male laughter echoed from the upstairs rooms repeatedly during the almost 10 years we lived there. Sometimes we heard music, other times indistinct conversations. It never really felt malicious, at least not at first. Every night something tucked my sister and me into bed. We would hear slow, deliberate footsteps ascending the staircase. Then our bedroom door would creak open. My covers would always be pulled up to my shoulders, gently, almost lovingly. Then I'd feel two light pats on my feet before the footsteps moved toward my sister's bed. She slept with the blankets over her face, so they were always pulled down just enough to uncover her shoulders. She, too, would receive the same gentle pats on her feet. Then whatever it was would leave our room, closing the door softly behind it, and climb into bed with our mother. She said she would feel the weight of an arm draping over her waist or the mattress shifting as if someone were lying beside her. But of course, when she turned to look, no one was there. Only a neatly rumpled pillow and blankets pulled back as if the bed had been occupied. This happened weekly, for years, like a loop. Later, we found out that an old man had died in that house. He had lived there with his children and grandchildren. Sometimes I wonder if our most cherished moments continue after death, replaying over and over, like an old man doting over his beloved family. It wasn't terrifying. It was comforting, if you can believe that. But when my older sister got married and moved out, things changed. The once gentle footsteps turned into loud, angry bangs. I began to feel something jabbing at me from under my mattress at night. Sleep paralysis became a regular horror in my life, and it was always bad. One night, when I was 16, I was sitting on my bed watching TV when the banging started again. I tried to ignore it. But then, I noticed something disturbing. My television was slowly jerking forward, inching toward the edge of the dresser. At first, I stared in disbelief. But when it became clear that it was about to lurch off and crash to the floor, I panicked. I lunged forward, grabbing it, and screamed for my father. He ran upstairs and found me clutching the TV, babbling about how it had nearly flown off the dresser. Not long after that, I woke up in the middle of the night to something worse. My mattress was vibrating, almost undulating beneath me. I bolted upright, and in a burst of terrified frustration, I shouted, "If something is here, then prove it!" The blankets were immediately yanked off my legs and flung across the room, landing in a crumpled heap against the wall. I laid in bed, frozen, staring at the ceiling until dawn, too afraid to blink. My mother called a priest after that and had the house blessed. It wasn't the last time she would have to. Story 35. I was 7 years old, lying in bed one night, when I suddenly got this overwhelming, gut-wrenching feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked around my room and froze. Every single photograph of people in the room looked like they were staring at me. Their faces, their expressions, they all seemed worried. The longer I stared, the worse it got. The feeling of dread intensified, like something bad was about to happen. And then, something even stranger happened. It wasn't like I was hearing voices, but my thoughts were translating what the photographs were saying. They were warning me. Something was coming. Something dangerous. I was so overwhelmed by the fear that I started screaming for my mother. She rushed into the room, and by then, I was crying uncontrollably. I couldn't even explain why I was crying. After she finally calmed me down, I told her what was happening. I told her she had to take the pictures down. She was freaked out, but she did her best to comfort me. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, the Whittier Narrows earthquake struck. We lived close to the epicenter. From that night on, every time an earthquake was about to happen, I would get that same feeling. The pictures would watch me again, warning me. Since moving out of Southern California, I've never had that feeling again. Story 36. When I was about 7, I remember getting off the bus from school, walking up my driveway and stepping onto the porch. But I don't remember ever walking into the house. The next thing I knew, I was still outside on the front porch. Only now, it was nighttime. I was wearing a black and purple gothic-looking dress, something I had never seen before and definitely didn't own. It wasn't what I had worn to school that day. I had no idea how I got there, or what had happened between getting off the bus and this moment. I remember just accepting the fact that I couldn't go inside, like it was a rule I understood without question. I curled up on my dog's bed and stared out at the tree line, keeping watch for night creatures. I live in a wooded area, and I've always been terrified of the dark, so this was absolutely awful for me. But I didn't fight it. I just sat there, waiting. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next time I woke up, I was in my bed. Morning sunlight was streaming through my window like nothing had happened. Confused, I asked my mom what I had done after school the day before. She listed off a normal afternoon. I ate a corn dog, played with my Barbies, and watched TV. Nothing about sleeping on the porch. Nothing about a missing time gap. Nothing about a dress I had never owned. But to this day, I know what I experienced, and I have no idea how to explain it. Story 37. I've been waiting for this topic to come up forever, but now it's probably too late, and this will just get buried. When I was about 5, I was sleeping over at my aunt's house with my twin brother. We were on her porch, sleeping in our sleeping bags, right next to the sliding glass door that led to her backyard. That night, I kept having nightmares. My sleep was restless and uneasy. At some point, I woke up. That's when I saw it. Through the glass door, a small dog was staring at me. It had huge round eyes like a chihuahua, something eerily similar to that Taco Bell dog. But it wasn't just a normal dog. It was bathed in this pale, ghostly blue light, completely still, watching me. I was only a foot away from it. The only thing separating us was the glass. Eventually, I managed to fall back asleep. But when I woke up again hours later, the dog was still there, unmoving, unblinking. This happened several times throughout the night. I would drift off, wake up, and check. And every single time, it was exactly where I had left it, staring. By morning, it was gone. I told my parents and my aunt. She swore that no one in her neighborhood had a dog like that. All her gates were locked, and she had never owned a dog in her life. For years, I carried that memory with me, unable to explain it. Then about 15 years later, my aunt was renovating her home. My brother and I were helping her move some stuff, and we ended up back on that same porch. Out of nowhere, he said, "I hated sleeping here as a kid. That light outside was way too bright, and I got the worst nightmares. I was always afraid of that cat watching me from outside." I stopped cold. He had seen it too. The same eerie presence, the same nightmare-filled night. But he had interpreted it as a cat instead of a dog. Whatever it was, this strange, unsettling creature deeply affected both of us. One day, I think I'll tell my kids this story as a ghost story. Story 38. When I was around 3 years old, I fell down my grandmother's steps one day. They were fairly steep, not easy for a toddler with wobbly legs to navigate. I ended up with a black eye and some nasty bruises. Now, I swear I remember this happening, but no one believes me. After that fall, for about 2 years, every time I stood at the top of her steps ready to go downstairs, it felt like an invisible force would lift me up and carry me down, gently placing me on the landing right next to the kitchen. Almost every Sunday night, the whole family had dinner at her house. As a kid, I remember thinking that I wished I could just keep floating into the kitchen so people would see me hovering in the air. But I was always set down at the bottom of the steps before anyone could notice. Then one day, a couple of years later, I stood at the top of the stairs expecting it to happen again. But it didn't. I tried as hard as I could, waiting for the feeling, but nothing happened. So I just walked down the steps, and from that day on, it never happened again. The weirdest part? My great-grandfather, on the other side of my family, died 6 days before I was born. He fell down a set of stairs while carrying an air conditioner. Could he have been the one helping me down all that time? Story 39. On my 5th birthday, I remember waking up to my parents and siblings standing around me, excitedly waking me up. But the strange thing is, that's my very first memory. I just suddenly knew their names, but I don't recall anything before that moment. At first, I didn't go downstairs right away. Instead, I explored what I somehow knew was my room. I almost fell a few times, like I was still getting used to my body. It felt strange, like I hadn't been there before. I went through my entire closet before picking out clothes, mimicking how my siblings were dressed. Eventually, I slowly made my way downstairs, following their voices. When I reached the bottom, my parents immediately noticed something was off. They said I was acting weird, barely speaking. They got so concerned they took me to the doctor, thinking something was wrong with my brain. But after running tests, the doctors found nothing. To this day, I have never remembered anything before my 5th birthday. That morning feels like the first moment I truly existed, my first me moment.